There's something haunting about watching a franchise die slowly, not in a single catastrophic failure, but in a gradual fade, a series of decisions that chip away at what made something special until you're left wondering what happened to that spark you once felt. That's the story of Watch Dogs. A franchise that arrived with so much promise, so much potential to redefine what open world games could be, only to stumble, lose its way, and ultimately disappear into the background noise of the gaming industry. I remember the first time I saw that E3 demo back in 2012. The rain-soaked streets of Chicago, the way Aiden Pierce could manipulate the entire city with his phone, the dark, grounded tone that felt like something genuinely new. This wasn't another power fantasy. This was about vulnerability in a connected world, about how technology had turned our cities into systems that could be exploited. It felt dangerous, it felt relevant, and for a moment it felt like Ubisoft had captured something that spoke directly to the anxieties of our digital age. But that's the thing about promise. It's only as good as what you do with it. And somewhere between that initial reveal and what we got 2 years later, something fundamental was lost. The graphics were downgraded, sure, and that became its own controversy, but the real problem ran deeper. The game that arrived in 2014 felt like it was caught between two identities. It wanted to be a serious commentary on surveillance and privacy, but it also wanted to be a playground where you could hack traffic lights to cause pile-ups for fun. It wanted Aiden Pierce to be a complex anti-hero, but it gave him all the personality of a gravel-voiced cliché reading lines from a rejected screenplay. The gameplay loop had moments of brilliance. Those stealth missions where you could infiltrate entire compounds without ever setting foot inside, bouncing between cameras and manipulating the environment, that was genuinely innovative. It showed what hacking could be in a video game beyond just pressing a button and watching something happen. But then you'd be forced into a gunfight, and suddenly you were playing a mediocre third-person shooter that couldn't hold a candle to Grand Theft Auto. The game couldn't commit. It couldn't decide if hacking was supposed to be your primary tool, or just a gimmick layered on top of familiar mechanics. And maybe that ambivalence is what defined Watch Dogs from the beginning. It was a franchise born from market research as much as creative vision. Ubisoft saw the success of Grand Theft Auto and wanted their own open-world empire, but they needed an angle, a hook that would make it feel distinct. So they chose hacking, they chose the surveillance state, they dressed it up in that specific mid-2010s techno-thriller aesthetic. But it always felt like the setting and mechanics were chosen to fill a niche rather than because someone had a burning story they needed to tell. When Watch Dogs 2 came around in 2016, Ubisoft made a choice. They looked at the criticism of the first game, the dour tone, the unlikable protagonist, the tonal inconsistency, and they overcorrected, hard. Watch Dogs 2 gave us Marcus Holloway and DedSec San Francisco, and suddenly everything was bright and colorful and ironic. The game was fun, genuinely fun, in ways the first one never managed. Marcus was likable, the world was gorgeous, and the hacking felt more integrated into the gameplay. On paper, it should have been exactly what the franchise needed, but something still fell off. In trying to escape the grim-dark seriousness of the first game, Watch Dogs 2 went so far in the opposite direction that it lost any sense of stakes. You're supposed to be fighting against oppressive tech corporations and government surveillance, but the whole thing is treated with this winking, aren't we clever attitude that undercuts any real tension. Your crew of hackers feels like they wandered out of a startup's promotional video, all quirky personalities and pop culture references, fighting the system while somehow never feeling like they're in any real danger. The game wanted to be Mr. Robot meets Silicon Valley, but it ended up feeling more like a Saturday morning cartoon about tech-savvy rebels, and the sales reflected that confusion. Watch Dogs 2 sold significantly worse than its predecessor, despite being, by most accounts, a better game. Maybe people were burned by the first one. Maybe the dramatic shift in tone alienated the audience that had been interested in the original's promise. Or maybe, and this is what I think really happened, people just didn't care about Watch Dogs as a concept anymore. It had failed to establish an identity that resonated. It was always the hacking game or Ubisoft's GTA. You can see Ubisoft grappling with this throughout the franchise's life. They kept trying to figure out what Watch Dogs was supposed to be. Each game felt like a different answer to the same question, and none of them quite landed. By the time Watch Dogs Legion rolled around in 2020, they'd taken the idea of losing identity and made it literal. Play as anyone, no main character. The entire population of London is your protagonist. It was a bold experiment, and in some ways, the logical endpoint of what the series had been about. The idea that anyone could be a hacker, that technology democratized resistance, But it also meant the game had no emotional center, no character to care about, no arc to follow, no reason to invest in anything beyond the mechanical loop of recruiting people and completing missions. The procedural generation that created all those unique NPCs meant that none of them felt genuinely written, genuinely human. They were templates with randomized traits, and you could feel it in every interaction. The gameplay was refined, the world was detailed, but it all felt hollow, like a tech demo for a system that nobody asked for. And this is where we have to talk about Ubisoft's broader problems, because Watch Dogs didn't fail in isolation. It failed as part of a pattern, a corporate approach to game development that prioritizes iteration over innovation, that takes creative risks and sands them down until they fit comfortably into established formulas. Every Ubisoft open-world game started to feel the same. The radio towers, the map littered with icons, the predictable structure that turned exploration into a checklist. Watch Dogs suffered from this more than most because its whole premise was supposed to be about disrupting systems, not conforming to them. The franchise also had terrible timing. It launched in an era when players were starting to feel fatigued with open-world games that confused size with substance. When Watch Dogs 2 tried to course correct, the market was already moving on. When Legion tried something experimental, it was competing against games like Cyberpunk 2077 that promised everything Watch Dogs did but bigger, prettier, more ambitious, even if they didn't always deliver. The franchise was always a step behind, chasing trends instead of setting them. But I think the real reason Watch Dogs failed, the thing that ultimately killed it, was that it never figured out what it wanted to say. Not really. The first game gestured at themes of revenge and surveillance, but wrapped them in such generic video game plotting that they lost all weight. Great franchises, the ones that endure, know what they're about. They have a thesis, even if it's simple. Watch Dogs never did. It was a collection of mechanics and aesthetics in search of a soul, and that's not enough. Players can sense when a game is going through the motions, when it's checking boxes rather than expressing something genuine, and once that perception sets in, it's almost impossible to shake. The tragic part is that buried somewhere in Watch Dogs, there was always something worth caring about. That E3 demo wasn't just hype and lies, it was a vision, however imperfectly realized. The idea of cities as vulnerable systems, of hacking as a form of power that levels the playing field, of technology as both tool and threat. These are rich themes. They matter more now than they did in 2012. In the right hands, with a clear vision and the courage to commit to it, Watch Dogs could have been essential. The franchise isn't officially dead. Ubisoft hasn't announced its cancellation. But it's been years now with no word of a new entry, and that silence speaks volumes. In an industry where successful franchises get annual installments or at least regular updates, absence is its own kind of eulogy. Watch Dogs is in limbo, neither alive nor officially buried, just gradually fading from memory as players move on to other games, other worlds, other stories that give them what Watch Dogs never quite could. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some ideas need to fail so that others can learn from their mistakes. If another studio, another creative team takes the core concepts of Watch Dogs and builds something with genuine vision, with cohesion, with something real to say, then perhaps Watch Dogs will have served its purpose. Not as a successful franchise, but as a cautionary tale and a stepping stone towards something better. Because the thing about potential is that it never really dies. It just waits. Somewhere in the wreckage of what Watch Dogs was, there's still that spark from 2012, that moment when it felt like we were seeing something that mattered. And if we're lucky, if the industry is willing to learn, that spark might ignite again in something new, something that finally delivers on the promise that Watch Dogs